please put the guns down. Please put the guns down. It's just not worth it. It's frustrating, it's heartaching. I just want to shed tears, not only for my nephew, but for everybody who's lost a loved one. This has to stop. It's absolute madness.
That's St. Louis City Alderman Jeffrey Boyd. And this week, like 103 other families in the city so far this year, he's burying a loved one lost to homicide. We've been told crime is going down. So what's going on? And what does it mean for all of St. Louis, not just the Alderman's ward on the north side of the city? Stay tuned.
Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned.
Many try to debate and even debunk the label of most dangerous, but it's hard to argue with the numbers in 2015. For a lot of people, St. Louis is not safe.
For somebody just snatched their life away because of what they think or what they want to do, it's just ridiculous. I don't understand it at all.
As of mid-July, there have been 104 murders reported in the city, on pace for one of the highest yearly totals in 20 years.
Put the guns down.
Including the murder of Rashad Farmer, the nephew of St. Louis City Alderman Jeffrey Boyd.
He didn't deserve this. We can do better than this. There's a lot of anger out in these streets, and we need to figure out how to reach and talk to some of these young people.
Boyd's emotional comments spoke to a frustration that seems to be boiling over. His pleas viewed more than 1 million times on social media.
We march every time the police shoot and kill somebody, whether they deserve it or not. I can't call it. But we're not marching when they're killing each other in the streets.
We cannot arrest our way out of this situation.
At the same time, new strategies from law enforcement leaders. Local and federal agencies are crossing jurisdictional boundaries with what they are calling Mission Save.
I don't think I've seen this level of coordination and engagement against all levels of law enforcement in the whole region since 9/11.
Formally announced this week, the partnership has been in practice since December. And as high as violent crime numbers may seem now, Police Chief Sam Dotson says they might be even higher if not for this new effort to combat crime.
We are now seeing second and third generation drug dealers and gang members who have grown up in a culture of violence.
Tonight in the studio, we've got representatives from law enforcement at the local and federal level and from the other side of the river, and one of the most vocal aldermen on the issue of crime in the St. Louis city and region for that matter. But first, let's start with Rick Rosenfeld, a Founders Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice, University of Missouri, St. Louis. Rick, thanks for coming back on the show. Sure. Let's just briefly start with, if I'm watching this in West County or O'Fallon, Illinois, does this matter to me?
Yes, it matters a great deal. First of all, people are losing their lives in our community, and that should matter to all of us. But on a practical level, high levels of violence retard economic growth in the city and, by the way, in the region, not just the city. It leads to population loss, erodes the tax base, undermines the school system. High levels of violence affect everybody.
Okay, so what's going on? Are we overblowing this? Or is it, are we underreacting or overreacting to the numbers that we're seeing so far in 2015?
I don't think the press is overblowing it. We've seen a 50% or so rise in homicide over the same period last year, for 6 months of this year. And last year we saw a third rise over the year before. So we are in the midst of a crime increase. It's real, it's not a media creation, and it's important to respond to it effectively.
Do we know why we're in the middle of this?
No, I don't think we do know why we've had such an abrupt increase in violence in St. Louis. But we do know a few things. We know St. Louis is not alone. A number of cities across the United States are now experiencing a crime rise for the first time in many years. We also know that although we sometimes gain the impression that violent crime is random in the city. In fact, it's quite specific to particular communities already disadvantaged in many, many other ways. And the persons who are most immediately involved, certainly as suspects, but also as victims, tend to be criminally involved themselves. Homicide is a way, it's an unfortunate, but it's a time-honored means for people who are criminally involved to settle disputes.
Speaking of time honored, if you can call it that in these circumstances, has that changed at all? I talk to police officers sometimes on the scene of a shooting near a playground or on their target's porch, the porch of their grandmother. There might have been a time when they didn't enact their revenge in those settings, and now they don't care.
There are two parts to the question. Has it changed? I don't think it's changed in fundamentals, no. Retaliatory violence is an important component of the violence problem. You do something to me, you steal from me, or you shoot an acquaintance or relative of mine, and I feel compelled to get back to you. And because I tend to be criminally involved myself, I can't go to the police, I'm not going to go to the courts, I have to take matters into my own hands. Is
social media, the immediacy of the way we communicate, is that having an impact, do you think?
No. I'm saying that rather bluntly. Social media certainly facilitates communication among everybody. But do I think social media is responsible for a 50% rise in homicide over the same period last year? No.
Do you put any stock in the so-called Ferguson effect?
To some degree, yes. The question is how you evaluate that. We're nearly a year now beyond Ferguson. And if by Ferguson effect what you mean, or what people mean, is that the police are simply withdrawing from the streets. They're not fully engaged in their jobs. I don't see much evidence of that, certainly in the last few months when we've seen big increases in crime. Probably the best indicator of police involvement is the arrest rate, and arrest rates are up, they're not down. So no, I don't think what we're seeing here is by and large a Ferguson effect.
What should we do? You said we've got to get it right.
Yeah. As I said earlier, this type of crime is heavily concentrated in a few places. 50% of all violent crimes occur on just 5% of street blocks in the city of St. Louis. We know where it occurs. And police need to be concentrated in those places. And once there, they need to concentrate their attention on the quote-unquote hot people in those places. People who are still on the streets, out of prison, for example. The police know from prior arrest histories that they're very, very active, and the police need to directly engage with them even when they're not currently committing a crime. The police need to send the message, along with other community members, that that kind of behavior is intolerable.
Rick Rosenfeld from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, thank you for your time, for getting us started. We also want to hear what you have to say. We had a Twitter chat earlier this week. Here's a little bit of that on that conversation.
Prior to this week's Stay Tuned Twitter chat, we've talked about what's most concerning about recent crime rates and what should be done. And on Tuesday's chat, we dove deeper on this critical matter. Tuesday night's Stay Tuned Twitter chat about crime in our region covered several bases. Early on, the tweeters made it clear that crime impacts us all, and every corner of the region needs to be concerned and actively working towards a solution. Many of the tweets expressed the importance of connecting with youth early and often. The sentiment was that young people are lacking opportunity and have little to live for, so they turn to a life of crime. When asked what should be done to reach youth and lessen the crime in our streets, there were several ideas as to what would work and what doesn't work. Rapper and activist Oops in the Building said, "We can't say put the guns down with nothing and not replace it with a resource, job, or education." Some of the tweeters were concerned that there hasn't been enough accountability placed on law enforcement to watch criminals. Solomon Alexander tweeted, "Police are doing a poor job of catching criminals. More than 70% of murders unsolved." Writer and social commentator Umar Lee had one of the more popular tweets of the evening. He said, We will continue to have violence as long as young people feel they have nothing to live for. Everyone agrees that a solution needs to be figured out, but what exactly those solutions are have been left to be seen. Should the talk around law enforcement be quality over quantity? Are we collectively ignoring our most underserved communities? Are we focusing enough on our youth? Want to be a part of our next chat? Follow us on Twitter at StayTunedSTL and join the conversation on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. with the hashtag StayTunedSTL.
Well, our next guest, speaking of social media, very active on social media on this topic, Antonio French, Alderman for the 21st Ward in the city of St. Louis. I want to back up for just a second to what we opened the show with, and what got a lot of people's attention this week was your fellow Alderman, Jeffrey Boyd, and his passionate plea. Your reaction to that, what did you make of either the reaction to it or the words he said?
You know, so I understand Alderman Boyd's frustration. I share his frustration, and you know, especially at that moment when he lost a family member, I understand his anger and frustration. I disagree a bit with the sentiment. There's always an audience for the idea that poor communities need to lift themselves up by their bootstraps, that these people need to just stop killing each other, which, by the way, both lumps victim and perpetrator in the same group. And I think what we've seen is that the conditions in these communities have created this situation, and that violence is a symptom of a greater problem that exists and has been allowed to fester in these neighborhoods for decades. And so, yes, we want 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds not to have guns, not to shoot each other, but they didn't create that situation. It is our fault that we have created these neighborhoods where these young people have easy access to guns, have no opportunities for jobs, and the only economic opportunities they have is through illegal activity, at least in their minds. And so we need to do a better job as a city by changing the quality of life in those communities, and I think violence will go down as a result of that investment.
You told the Riverfront Times, we don't hold white victims responsible for their perpetrators. Never do we say the loft dwellers need to step up and make their streets safer. Double standard.
It is very frustrating as a North St. Louis resident that we have repeatedly said we need resources. We need a different kind of policing. We need the same attention as more affluent neighborhoods. And the response is, you guys just need to somehow do it yourselves. And we don't have the resources. We are taxpayers. We pay into the pot, and we expect to be represented just like anyone else. And so a few years ago, Chief Dodson redrew the districts of the city. And North Patrol, I think, got severely undermanned. And so I think what we're seeing 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later is a result of a policing change that has negatively affected these neighborhoods. And as a response, we do this hotspot policing thing. What we really need to do is identify, and this is where Rick and I agree, is that there are some neighborhoods that over the last decade have seen high crime. These neighborhoods have also seen high rate of vacancy, high rate of depopulation, high rate of unemployment. And those need to be the target neighborhoods for the city to change the quality of life in those communities, and violence for the overall city will go down if we make that investment.
50% of the crime and 5% of the blocks, I think he said. That's right. Stark. That's not something I think a lot of people would.
But it also shows that it is a challenge that we can meet. So we know where it's occurring, and that we still have not made the necessary investment in those areas. Bringing crime down by 50% in those 5% of the areas will lower the city's crime by 30 or 40%. So that is where the fight is, and that's where we need to be making investments.
Of course, the mayor and the chief have asked for, I believe, 160 new officers. The Board of Aldermen, your chamber there, has not come up with the funding. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
Without going into a whole...
Sure, that's a bit disingenuous, number one. Number one is that over the last 2 years, both the mayor and the chief have lowered the number of police officers. When they started doing that, many of us asked the question, are you sure you want to do that? What we were told is that we're doing different police techniques. We are relying now on the hotspot policing technique. We don't need as many officers on the street. And so 2 years later, when we have reduced the number of police and violence has shot through the roof, the mayor comes and says he wants 160 new officers, but doesn't give us a way to pay for it. And so if it costs us an additional $8 million a year, we have to figure out where to get that money from. And so it's a quick way to put the responsibility on somebody else. Number one, by saying I want this thing that I have no idea how to pay for. And number two, knowing that even if we pass that today, those officers wouldn't hit the ground or the streets for another year or year and a half. They have to go through training. So we need immediate results. And we also need a plan for what we're going to do with the existing police resources, police officers, and what we would do with additional resources.
Let's pause for 1 second. There is at least one plan that we've heard about this week. It's called Mission Save. Here's a little bit more on that from social media, and we'll dive into that afterwards. Okay, so joining Antonio and me for this discussion about this Mission Save from the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office, Assistant Circuit Attorney of the City of St. Louis, Krista Boston, is at the table, and also Tim McDermott with the Drug Enforcement Agency, Special Agent in Charge in the St. Louis Division. So when you're shaking your head, no, did I make a mistake? I'm sorry.
I'm Assistant Special Agent in Charge.
Assistant Special Agent in Charge. Your boss would not appreciate that. I apologize.
No problem.
Thanks for correcting me. Start me off. Why are the feds at the table on this discussion? Is that a sign that things are even worse than we might think?
No, it's a sign that the resources are coming together between the state and local agency and the federal agencies to combat crime in St. Louis. We're taking a approach with the federal agencies, resources, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the county, the city, the City Prosecutor's Office, as well as the FBI, DEA, St. Louis PD, the county PD, and we're all coming together under one roof to combat crime and those individuals that are committing the crime in St. Louis.
So what can we do? What can our city police, for instance, do with you guys in the mix, with the prosecutor's office all at the same time? What can they do that they couldn't do before the federal government was involved?
Well, the difference is we have different laws that we can charge in the federal system. We bring resources that the state and locals don't have. We also bring intelligence that they may or may not have. And we bring expertise that we are focused in long-term investigations, and we are focused on certain type of violators that meet the standards of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And unfortunately, we've come to that point where some of these people are moving large amounts of drugs, are involved in violence with firearms, and those are the people that we are directed towards based on intelligence, and those are the investigations that we will do and are doing as we speak.
Krista, how much of what we're talking about here has to do directly with drugs? There's been a lot of conversation nationally that we've over-sentenced when it comes to drugs and other things of that nature. How much do drugs really play into the violence we're seeing this past 7 months?
I think we're seeing that the drugs are they're a systemic problem in the city. As Alderman French was talking about, all kinds of systemic problems, and that's one of the parts of Mission Save is this holistic approach. And that includes, while we're concentrating on those folks that are crime drivers driving the violence, we're also looking at a more holistic look in terms of bringing the community involvement into the system and looking at ways to find those folks that can be redirected, that they're starting out in this area and redirecting them.
So what does that mean? Because I've heard knocking on the doors. We heard from Rick earlier talking about folks who have come out of prison and are statistically speaking likely to re-offend. What does this look like in real terms? How do you prevent a crime? Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, I think there are some folks that are starting out in the life of crime that can be redirected through social services, through community involvement. That's the holistic approach, and that's what we're looking at. Mission Save is looking at it, and our office, the Circuit Attorney's Office, has completely reorganized to look towards this. We were looking at that before 2015. That was something that was things that we were looking at. We've been involved with the community for over a decade, but now we're getting the community further involved to help redirect folks that we can. There's obviously going to be individuals that require removal from society because they are involved in the violence that's plaguing our city. But we certainly want to tailor how we're looking at both the crime drivers of the violence and those folks that we can reach through the community engagement in this holistic approach.
I think the chief said that if not for this mission SAVE that had been going on kind of behind the scenes until this past week, that the numbers we're looking at in terms of homicides could be even higher. Do you feel like is that true?
I agree. We never know what we don't know. So this task force is going after the folks that have not been able to be rehabilitated, haven't taken the opportunities to seek out jobs, seek out other avenues other than crime. And when they get to our level, unfortunately, that's the last for them. So we are seeking them out. We are doing investigations currently right now to try to take those people off the street, because we know those are the people that are prone to violence, prone to use guns, and are selling large amounts of drugs to continue to support their livelihood as well as their criminal activity.
I want to add one more person to this conversation, and while we do that, let's take a look at one man who is making a symbolic stand in a sign.
I'm up here to stop the senseless violence that's going on all around and tainting all the good stuff that's actually going on. St. Louis is not a war zone. This is appropriate because this is the Del Mar Divide, the edge of everything in this town. At one time, this was the epicenter of entertainment, Fox Theater, Grand Center, all of that's right there. And then if you pan 30 degrees that way, you have North College Street, you have North Market Street, you have open-air drug markets, you have people scared to even go out of their houses. You got bars on all the windows. And you go 2 blocks this way, and you can't give the land away. 2 blocks, not 1, 2. 1, 2. 1 block, $80 million apartment complex. Next block, boarded up buildings and abandoned buildings. So this is the appropriate place to highlight this. I've been posting and building billboards in North St. Louis for 30 years. My dad did it for 30 before me. My grandfather did it for 30 before him. And my grandmother from Morehouse, Missouri, her family was from East St. Louis. So these places are all sources of pride in our family. They're not places to avoid like the plague. I've never been to a funeral of a close person who has died. But I've lived in St. Louis for 30 years. They kill 200 people a year, so that means 6,000 people have died. And it's not that I don't know one of them, but my point is that a lot of people in this town are 18 years old and they've already buried 3 of their closest friends. And by the time they're 25, they might have gone to the funerals of 3 to 6 to 10 close people that they know that one minute they're playing ball with and the next minute they're lowering them into the ground.
Rick Rosenfeld's back with us, and we're also bringing in Lieutenant Tim Tyler from Illinois State Police, because we're hearing that things are going in the right direction on the Illinois side of the river. Is that true, and how are you doing it?
Well, we're trying, and we're not doing it alone. The cooperative, collaborating policing strategies that we're using through the U.S. Attorney's Office, through the state's Attorney's Office, all the local police, with the state police assistant. But most importantly, we have a community effort with the faith-based, non-for-profit organizations like Project Compassion, where they're stepping up also and providing the help. So we're constantly in the schools. A lot of my teammates, the Illinois State Police, we're going back into the community. We're coaching baseball, football.
So does this sound familiar, what you're hearing from the Mission SAVE folks?
Yes, it's all going great. And the most important part for the community to know, it's going to take investment. It's not a quick fix.
Time or money? What are you talking about?
Both, time and money. Bottom line up front, the children in the community, if we reach them early, we save them faster. We'd rather spend our time up front when they're 6 and 7 years old by bringing them in a culture that we already know, so when they're 18 and 19, they can live like we live. they can understand the American dream with going to college and becoming a productive citizen.
Do you believe it's possible to reach folks that we're talking about here who may have a high chance of reoffending and changing the trajectory that they're on if you didn't catch them when they were 7 or 8 years old?
Absolutely. You have to understand, I work gangs in Illinois. Illinois has one of the highest gang population in the United States. I found through my studies that gangs are made in 3 places: at home, in the neighborhood, and at schools. So one of our way that we're combating it, we're going into the schools, we're going into the neighborhoods. So now when they see the police, we're already established a rapport. They don't know me as Lieutenant Tyler, they just know me as Coach. So when I come down and patrol, or when I go out to the with the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we actually have a pizza bus and feeding the kids. So we see them multiple times during the day, and now we have that rapport. Most of our crimes are solved by citizens calling and letting us know what's going on.
Which is something I know we hear the police say is a hard thing to accomplish. Does this all sound like a plan? You're asking for a plan often online on social media.
It's part of it. So there's a law enforcement component, absolutely. It's a necessary component. But it also requires a lot of investment in these neighborhoods, lots of civic engagement, mentoring, cleaning up of a lot of the vacancy and the derelict buildings that we see, so that you don't go through a community and you see it looks neglected and you see this looks like a safe place to commit crimes. So there's several different components. You know, we started a website called comprehensiveplan.org with a lot of this on there. But we do need a little bit more leadership, I think, at the local level. And we've been calling on the mayor to create a plan. This task force has been in existence for a few months. They had this press conference, but that's not exactly what we were looking for. It's a component, a necessary component, but we're still looking for more.
You know, what you brought up at the top of the show sounds an awful lot like hotspot policing, which sometimes is a dirty word. Where does that fit in?
Yeah, Alderman French and I have had some disputes over time about what hotspot policing means. Let me give you a sense of what I think it means.
And let me warn you that we're almost out of time.
All
We may
right.
have to take it online, but go ahead and give me 10 seconds.
The Alderman has talked about hotspots policing as whack-a-mole policing. Police show up, deal with crime problems, and then leave. My sense of hotspot policing is quite different. Police show up, deal with immediate problems, have to go elsewhere, but then return periodically to those areas.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Stay tuned. 9net.org. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. I get in trouble for overrunning the crew, but go ahead. I want to let you finish there if I cut you off.
Yeah.
They come back and stay. That's
the whack-a-mole model. Police come in, deal with the crime problems, and then get lost. That is not an effective crime control strategy.
That we agree on.
Yeah, we agree on that. Should the police permanently occupy particular areas? No. What I think, and what I think the research suggests, is that the police do go in initially, deal with problems initially, assuming some success, then they move elsewhere, crime does move, and they return periodically to those areas. And they don't have to occupy the area permanently, but they have to be back in sufficient numbers so that people in the community, both criminals and other residents, think, police could be around the corner any minute.
And where we differ is that I think that we need to look at those neighborhoods that over the last decade have accounted for the majority of the violence.
Agreed.
Those are the areas we need to target with police resources. So we need more community policing in those areas over a long-term period, at least 12 to 18 months, not 2 weeks. And we also need other agencies and city governments to prioritize those areas. So SLATE, targeting job placement, forestry, going in and make sure those areas are clean. SLDC to come up with development plans and economic incentives for businesses to open up in those communities and for jobs to be created. But we just need to prioritize those areas in the same way as state officials and local officials prioritize the Rams' needs or Paul McKee's needs. But citizens in those neighborhoods have needs too, and those need to be prioritized.
It sounds like this is a little of what you all are talking about on the law enforcement side of the table. Is this a new way of being a cop,
Well, in my opinion, police are from the community for the community. It's time for police officers to accept their responsibility that they're for the community. And that's going to take time, being in school, reading, spending time with the children. I know I'm sound like officer friendly here, but bottom line up front, I wouldn't be wearing this uniform right now if a police officer didn't take time for me. And that's what it's got to get back to that. Police have to get back into the communities.
So are there enough of you to do that work?
Absolutely not. But with everyone at the table and our elected officials, we're beginning to see that it's going to take more than just the hotspot policing and just the different type of initiatives that show up. It has to be a permanent solution, a permanent part of the policing strategies now.
You are new to St. Louis, relatively speaking, as your assignments take you around different parts of the country. You just from DC, I believe?
I am, yes.
Give us your assessment, if you can, of just the situation in St. Louis, coming from a larger city with a history of having its own crime issues.
I think it's typical of a city that has crime focused in certain areas. And I think that what we've talked about at the table here today is something that is a good objective. I think with law enforcement reaching out, and we have the community outreach part of it, it's something that, like the lieutenant said, is doable. I think it's going to take time. I think it's going to take everybody coming together. And it's also going to take the responsibility on the folks that are committing the crimes to want to change. Until that happens, it's going to be very difficult. But as he said, if we can get them when they're younger and give them an outlet to do other things, play sports, go to school, get an education, get a job, get a trade, whatever, before they end up seeing us. And nobody here wants to see a young man going to jail for X amount of years, I assure you. So we're all parents as well. So people think that law enforcement is the big and the bad. It's not. When they get to us, unfortunately, we deal with them in a certain way. But we hope that St. Louis will be able to get out of this. And I think with everybody coming together, that's something that can happen in the near future.
And maybe a couple of years, though. I know James Clark with Better Family Life said that he thinks this is going to take another 3 years. 2018 is the earliest he thinks that these numbers could start going down. Final thought from the prosecutor side of the issue.
Well, I think that between Mission Save and everybody having this on the forefront, the media has it on the forefront, the community has this on the forefront, a need and a desire to solve this problem, that as we close all of these communication gaps, both with law enforcement, the criminals can't win if we have all that information and we're sharing that information and we're collaborating on it. And then we have the community that's willing to collaborate. Everybody is talking about this, everybody is engaged, and everybody can do something. There are so many things. There is not a single citizen that there isn't something that they can do, whether that's donating money or donating their time to an organization that mentors use, or that is simply, telling their neighbor, make sure you lock up your gun, make sure you don't leave it in your car, or, asking a neighbor to participate or supporting a neighbor who needs them to participate in the criminal justice system.
I said that was the final thought, but I'm curious if the people in the 21st Ward would buy into this. Are they buying into the fact that things can turn around?
So I don't think they're very optimistic right now because they haven't seen any kind of change on the part of the city and police leadership right now. We want to see reallocation of resources. We want to see more officers. We want to see a plan to deal with the vacant buildings, the economic development needs, the job placement needs. But I also say this, is that if there is a Ferguson effect, it is that this is the worst I've seen relationships between the community and the police. And so a lot of who our natural allies would be aren't participating like they used to. So I get senior citizens who normally be the first ones to call, who don't call as often anymore. And so we have to repair that relationship if we have any hope of lowering these numbers.
You're nodding vigorously.
Absolutely. There's no question. I mean, the prosecutor can tell you, everyone at the table can tell you that the toughest part of both investigating and then clearing these crimes is securing cooperation from witnesses, others in the community. And if people are alienated from the police, they're not going to get that cooperation.
I think we'll leave it there. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.